Apple recently made the announcement that they're switching to their own custom silicon in their Mac line, moving away from their current Intel processors. So after hearing this, you may have a lot of questions like, how does this affect me? What does this mean for my current Mac? What if I'm looking into purchasing a new Mac? What is Apple Silicon? What is an Intel processor? And what even is a processor? So let's dive in and answer some of these big questions. Here's an elementary guide to Apple Silicon. Let's first start off with the basics. What is a processor? A processor is the brain of your device, and it handles all the basic processing, all the basic commands that you give your device. And it's found everywhere across the world of technology, from something as simple as a calculator to something as advanced as a master computer. And since 2005, it's been Intel who's provided the brain to every Mac computer. Now, Apple is transitioning away from Intel in favor of Apple Silicon, their own in-house custom-made processors. So why don't they call them processors? Why do they refer to them as Apple Silicon? And that's because they're not just a processor. They're actually an SoC, or system on a chip. What this means is that built into the processor, there's many other technologies that help it progress in performance, which in some ways gives it the upper hand over Intel processors. And to those who say, since when does Apple make processors? They make their own custom processors in all of their other products. The Apple TV, the iPod Touch, the iPhone, and the lower end iPads and the HomePod all use the same A-series processor, with the iPadPro lineup getting a double speed sometimes, or a higher end version of their A-series chip. In the Apple Watch, you can find the Series S. You can find a small hint of them in Macs with the T-series security chips. And then there's the H-series, which you can find in Apple's AirPods or AirPods Pro or Beats X. So what was wrong with Intel processors? Why make the switch? Apple, of course, will not say for sure what the reason is. But over the past couple years, it's been evident what the issue is. Intel is no longer innovating at the speed Apple wants. One of the problems with processors, there's a lot more data that needs to be processed than there used to be. And whenever that data gets processed, the processor runs hot. And to protect the processor from getting damaged from getting too hot, it thermal throttles. So when a processor gets to a certain temperature, the speed of the processor slows down. And that could be a huge performance hit for computers. And Intel has struggled to keep those promises of lowering the heat output of their processors, but they haven't been able to keep that promise. And we've seen Apple wanting to shrink their devices. Look at the MacBook that was released in 2015. The thing was so small, and it was meant to be for a more power efficient and a cooler processor. And Intel hasn't been able to spin one out. But if we look at the iPhone and iPad, we see where Apple has managed to throw in so much power into these devices and still be able to operate coolly, where you don't get a performance hit from your device overheating, and it's powerful. In the 2018 and 2020 iPad Pro is faster than their lower end MacBooks, and that's crazy. Apple has managed to progress their processors in-house quicker than Intel. And you also add on to the fact of optimization, which we see with the iPad and iPhone. Apple is able to deeply integrate the way the OS works with the processor, which makes everything work more fluidly. So when we look at how fast we expect these new Macs to be, and they're planning on replacing all of their Macs that they currently sell now, even their high-end Mac Pro, with Apple processors, replacing those high-level Intel processors. So Apple's going to have to find a way to match the speed of those current even high-end Intel processors that we see in things like the iMac Pro and the Mac Pro. And to that, I would say once again, look at the iPad. When Apple first made this announcement, they also told developers that they were going to ship a Mac Mini that was running off the current processor that's powering the latest iPad Pro. So now we have essentially an iPad Pro that's running Mac OS. Will this be a smooth transition? We'll have to see. See, the issue is that Intel processors talk a different language than Apple Silicon. Intel processors speak a language called x86, while Apple Silicon speaks ARM. And since they're incompatible, Apple's had to come up with unique ways to make this transition seamless. Apple's going to make it easy for developers to update their apps for the new language. Because most developers use Xcode, which is a coding platform for developers to use to code for all sorts of Apple products. And because of that, Apple's able to add in features into Xcode that will make it seamless for even the developer to switch over their app from speaking x86 to ARM. And they're going to do that through two technologies. And these are nothing new. These are iterations from the last transition of PowerPC to Intel back in 2005. The first way is using Universal 2, which will basically create within one app, it will have the language to be run on both Intel and Apple Silicon. So you can run it on both computers with no issues. Then there's Rosetta 2, which will translate Intel's x86 over into Apple Silicon's ARM. This time, we shouldn't see as much of a performance hit because this translation will happen as soon as you install the x86 app instead of in real time as you're using the app. And now this isn't to say all apps will take advantage of this. You have to make sure as a consumer that the developers of the apps you use daily, especially if you're a pro user, are going to update their apps to support ARM. Because if they don't, for now, those apps may work using those two translation tools I talked about earlier. But in the future, at some point in time, as Apple always does, they're going to drop it in favor of forcing developers to update their apps to fully natively support Apple Silicon. Apple says that they're going to take 2 years for this transition from Intel to their own custom silicon. To give this transition a head start, Apple's already translated all of macOS and all of their applications. This includes things like Photos and Safari, calendars and notes, and everything that you find natively on macOS now made by Apple, and even the pro apps like Logic and Final Cut. Apple's already translated those for Apple Silicon. So those are all ready to go for the release of the new Macs. And then you have Apple's partners, Microsoft with Microsoft Office, and Adobe, who have both committed to editing their applications to support Apple Silicon. Since iOS and macOS both understand ARM, Apple's bringing all of the iPhone and iPad apps to the desktop. Now, this will not be seamless. It'll be up to the developers to tweak their apps just a bit so they're a little more mouse friendly, because don't forget, Apple still doesn't have a touch screen Mac. For those of you who are boot camp users, the feature in macOS that whenever you turned on your computer, it lets you choose whether to boot into Windows or boot into macOS. Unfortunately, with Apple Silicon Macs, that feature is going to have to be removed since Windows does not understand ARM. They are only x86. But that being said, Apple's partnered with VM Fusion and Parallels, so instead of running one or the other, you can run them both at the same time. And updates for those two apps will come in the future as Apple Silicon-based Macs are released. So what will happen to your current Intel-based Mac? Nothing. Apple has long been known to support all their devices long into the future. Look at iOS 14, which will be supported on all the devices iOS 13 was. That means iOS 14 will be supported all the way back to the iPhone SE. Look for the same support in macOS. I imagine Apple will support current Intel-based Macs for another 4 to 5 years. Apple has also told us that they still have Intel Macs in the pipeline. to be released later. So your Intel Macs will not age. They will continue to get software updates long into the future, as they usually would if Apple hadn't made the transition to begin with. So now the question is, should you buy a Mac now? You've seen the performance in your iPhones and your iPads, and now that same performance is coming to the Mac. So if you're someone who needs a computer now, go get an Intel one. As I said, Apple plans on releasing new Intel computers for a little while. At least they have a couple more in the pipeline. So Intel Macs are not going away right now. But if you can wait and find out what happens in the fall. Especially if you're looking for a laptop, because Apple Silicon will do way better in the laptop form than Intel processors do right now. Apple says that they're going to take 2 years for this transition from Intel to their own custom silicon. They'll be using many different ways to be able to translate the different languages of their old x86 Intel processors to their new Apple Silicon ARM-based processors using Universal 2 and Rosetta 2. You're going to see iOS and iPadOS apps come and greet us on macOS. And you're going to see an overall better experience in Macs. They're not going to run as hot, hopefully. They're going to have better performance, better graphics. I'm excited to see what happens with this. I think everybody in the tech community is. And it really won't affect the average consumer so much. If you use big name apps like Adobe or Microsoft, or you stick to Apple's built-in apps, you're going to be fine. Both those companies and all the big companies, of course, have all committed to upgrading their apps to Apple Silicon. And if they didn't, they would lose a whole group of customers. And if they don't move your app over, look for a different one. The Mac App Store is going to be cluttered with apps from iOS and iPadOS, which when they're downloaded on a Mac will still make you want to touch the screen, but you're still stuck with a cursor. But the features will still be there. The experience may be lacking a bit. So this has been a rundown of what Apple Silicon is and what the Apple has in store for the future of the Mac. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Check out the links in the description below for more help. And if you're leaving with more questions and answers, leave them in the comments below. Also be sure to check out our website, Apple Guide Web, and all of our social media pages. Thanks for watching.